Talk entrepreneurship here on Classic Business, where we really pay tribute to the small and medium-sized enterprises, the SMEs in South Africa, who have long been cited as the most critically important means of generating new jobs and promoting economic growth. Where unemployment is a stark reality, we really need to raise up the story of our entrepreneurs. And building a stronger SME sector in the country is just a logical step that will help both ordinary South Africans and the economy in many, many ways. Regretfully, though, most small firms fail within the first 2 years if they don't receive significant help. Well, to find out how one of the most successful early-stage investors and incubators has managed to intervene so successfully over the years, I'm joined now by Janice Johnston, CEO of Edge Growth Ventures, to unpack the significance of a more robust SME sector in 2024. Janice, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Wonderful to be on your show with you, and certainly look forward to discussing this really important segment of the economy.
Now, put it into context for us. Just how important are SMEs in terms of job creation and economic upliftment in South Africa?
Michael, their importance cannot be overstated. A recent report by the IFC states that SMEs generate about 34% of the country's GDP, and even more critically, they employ approximately 60% of its workforce. And as we know, with the various headwinds that are sort of facing corporate South Africa, job creation is definitely happening at an extremely pedestrian level. So in order to be able to address some of the stark challenges of unemployment, we are going to have to look to our SMEs to really carry the opportunities and to unlock some real growth potential in the broader landscape.
How important is it that bigger established business, and we often talk about corporate South Africa and SMEs as almost isolated and distinct from each other, but it's a far more symbiotic relationship, isn't it? We talk about payment in 30 days and that kind of thing. How important is collaboration between big and small business in the country?
Yeah, it's such a fundamental part of creating these opportunities in the B2B segment for SMEs. And to be honest, there's been some great work in terms of the legislation of BE requirements for supply development and enterprise development contributions within the various sectors, which has placed the role of SMEs more at the focus for some of these big corporates, and they certainly have played a part, but there is more to be done, because being able to ensure that they get within that supply chain, that there's support for them to get the various contracts, both in terms of size and consistent quality, will really be such key growth vectors for these companies.
The codes, I think, are extremely important. Enterprise and supply development in particular has some great success stories. It's also got lots of stories where firms have told me on my show they've been through these programs for a year, 2 years. There was a certain degree of mentorship and incubation, but then afterwards the PO, the purchase order, just never arrived, and many of the SMEs felt that perhaps the program was a little bit misleading or maybe wasn't worth their time. What are the barriers that you see currently that exist that hinder effective collaboration, and what strategies do you propose for overcoming these when we talk about effective enterprise and supply development?
I mean, I think that's definitely a fair comment and reflection, and it has, in certain cases, been a bit of a mixed bag. Extremely catalytic for certain SMEs and possibly less so for others. So one would need to unpack what were the thinking within those particular corporates, or sort of areas where they were struggling to get over the line to provide more business within, to the SMEs into their supply chain. But a lot of it does come with this need for pre-investment or support to get those SMEs ready for these bigger contracts, ensuring that they have the right scaffolding and infrastructure in order to deliver and scale to meet the requirements of the bigger corporate invoices that they need to be articulated. So I think it's definitely a bit on both sides in terms of where the responsibility sits, and that is where the likes of Edge Growth and other kind of support providers can play a critical role.
Yeah, because you may have a great product or service, but in order to offer that, to your point, at scale or at a consistent quality that is demanded by a corporate off-taker can be a challenge. I know there's some very innovative solutions. I've heard of some programs that collate different SME providers maybe around a similar product to reach a scale threshold, and maybe working in collaboration with other smaller providers, one can overcome those barriers. But it is all about innovating. I think every corporate is different, every procurement process is different, but one does need the fundamentals, the good financial management and the governance processes, and all of those I'm sure Edge can bring in. The big one for me is digital transformation, because that's often emphasized as this necessity for sustainable growth within the SME sector, and also where SMEs are a lot more agile and nimble to embrace and adopt new technologies. How should SMEs be thinking about the digital opportunity set, especially given that often it's a sector with limited financial resources?
So I think the real growth in the digital transformation area is really going to be hugely beneficial for SMEs, as the cost of some of these particular programs and platforms have come down quite substantially, and they can really use some of them in the most effective way, be that cloud computing, be that improved data analytic capabilities, or even some artificial intelligence in order to streamline some of their processes and procedures even further. So I think there's a lot that can be done at in a reasonably cost-effective way to provide a more robust operation, and also in order for them to understand their business and the various business segments at a even deeper level, which will enable them to be more agile and sustainable going forward.
I think a big challenge for all businesses, not just small businesses, but big businesses as well, is to stay abreast of these new technologies, and also to know when to hire in the skills if you don't have them, or when to partner with someone who does have the skills. And I just think skills development in general is crucial for any business to remain competitive and to drive growth. For SMEs, how can they prioritize and invest in skills development, especially considering their potential resource constraints, and especially when you're competing against other larger employers? How can SMEs stay in the skills development race?
So the SMEs actually have a lot to offer in skills development, particularly as it comes to more sort of hands-on and collaborative approaches, because they're obviously dealing with a slightly smaller workforce, and potentially they are able to provide a wider range of skill development across the different operations or verticals within the business, which can be hugely beneficial to provide a more robust and strong workforce to meet the various demands, and also can facilitate a lot of knowledge sharing within the various staff complements. It is, however, crucial that they do get some support externally as well to enhance what they're able to deliver internally. And that often comes through various funders who have business development and support budgets through various grant funding that they've been able to raise, which they can deploy into these businesses and really ensure that they're getting the right type of level of training and capacity building that will really set them up for their future growth.
And, it reminds me of the very successful youth employment service, which is part of a government incentive to at least take a bit of a risk on young first-time entrance into the labor market. And, often an SME would be loath to do that, given how inflexible our labor laws are perceived to be. I don't know necessarily how much that inflexibility is a perception versus reality on the ground, but the Youth Employment Service has certainly helped there. Given that, what other role do you see government policies and regulations playing in creating a more enabling environment for SME growth? We often bang about the differences between SMEs and big business, and yet they operate with the same regulatory burden, the same red tape burden. And I think for many SMEs, it can just drown them. What would you like to see from government to better support our SMEs on this front?
So I think there, as you mentioned, there are a number of elements in terms of actually getting various businesses going. From a company secretarial perspective, that could certainly be made a lot more streamlined. There's also some elements within, the tax regime and setup and just generally getting the business going. That would be hugely beneficial if some of those areas could be a bit more user friendly and timeous. And then I think just on a extended perspective, just having the SME sort of top of mind when setting some of these regulatory environments, such that they can make a distinction between certain entities by size and scale, so that it's not just a one-size-fits-all perspective, which can be hugely burdensome, particularly on, say, like some of the labour relations elements as well, which can make it more of a costly and bigger decision for the SMEs to make when they're wanting to hire. And maybe a more flexible environment would enable them to actually expand those positions even further.
Absolutely, especially in a country where we don't have a scarcity of labor. We've got a surplus of labor. I was chatting to Dr. Roy Haverman about this, who is formerly inside Treasury and now CEO of Crutham SA. And it's almost madness that where you've got a surplus labor environment, that you would have fairly inflexible labor laws and you'd have minimum wages as well. Not that I'm advocating for exploitation, but I think for small businesses, they'd be much more inclined to take a risk, take a gamble with someone who's just entering the labor force if they were able to let them go if they weren't up to the required standard that they were looking for. Equally, if they are, well, then you created one more sticky job in the economy. And with our record levels of unemployment, that has certainly got to be one of government's key objectives. Just lastly, Janice, I mean, looking ahead to the rest of the year and beyond, we've just had the budget. There were some very interesting announcements in the budget that we were chatting about off air around exchange controls and further relaxation there. What are your main aspirations and objectives for Edge Growth in terms of supporting SME development, and what is your outlook for SMEs this year? Are there any green shoots out there?
They definitely are, particularly in certain sectors and business models that have proved to be very resilient to the current economic climate. And these tend to be ones that have strong financial management, have a wide variety or a broader variety of financial options at the ready, and ones that have been able to build in some kind of energy sufficiency, such that they're not as influenced or impacted by load shedding at the moment, and ones that are really focusing on sustainability and the various opportunities that can actually bring them. You know, often companies tend to think of this as being a sort of administrative burden, but our experience is showing that it's actually potentially a great area of expanding into new customer bases and to increasing trust with stakeholders, which could certainly build the business and really be fully aligned to where we see some of the strong trends, both domestically and globally.
It reminds me of a blog post that was written by the IMF a couple of months ago in December, saying that the expected net benefit for global domestic product by 2050 in pursuing net zero is a 7% boost to global GDP, which far exceeds the cost. And I think far too often we focus on the cost of things sometime and we don't see the potentially transformative opportunity in these strategies as well. Great chatting to you, Janice Johnston, CEO of Edge Growth Ventures, talking a little bit more about the importance of a more robust SME sector and the role that both business and government can play in supporting our SMEs. In this week's Talking Entrepreneurship here on Class.